Well, joining us now from Washington, D.C., Jonathan Capehart, editorial writer for The Washington Post, and Mark Tapscott, editorial page editor for The Washington Examiner. You're looking at live pictures of the oil well cap that is now in place. BP claims oil no longer flowing into the Gulf. That supposes, of course, that the only hole in the ground is the 6-inch diameter hole that you see there capped. Matt Simmons argues you can't spill 300 or 400 million gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico out of a 6-inch wide pipe, not to mention explode a 5-story building, which is how big a blowout preventer is, and not end up with more than a small hole. Either way, we're joined by Mark and Jonathan. Politically, you've got some interesting headlines that on the surface, Jonathan Capehart, would seem to play to the president, both in passing financial reform and having the ability to cap the well.
Yes, this is a big day for the president, a big day for the administration. You know, financial reform is terrific, but getting that that oil well capped was paramount. It became sort of a metaphor for a government and an administration that couldn't control a disaster. And so, you know, the pictures that we're seeing right now for finally, after I think it's 87 days, not seeing oil heartbreakingly gushing into the Gulf is a good thing for everyone. Now,
the irony, of course, with both of these is that their oil still could be gushing into the Gulf. It's just not on camera. And too big to fail hasn't been fixed. They just passed reform, Mark Tapscott.
Oh, absolutely. That's the case. And I have to say, Jonathan, it was just a couple of weeks ago that you were explaining to me that President Obama could not swim down there and put the cap on it, but now it sounds like you think he did swim down there and put the cap on today.
Mark, you know, give me a break. I'm looking at the camera now. I don't see Aqua Obama swimming away from the thing. Look, we all have to agree that it's a good thing for the president, a good thing for the country that this has been capped.
Of course.
I just am concerned, based on my own reporting, Jonathan, that it actually is capped. But if it is capped,
sure,
I believe that. Matt Simmons has been too right for too long. And he's too disgusted and too offended by the entire process because he understands what's going on.
Dylan, well, you know, the Russians President Reagan had the thing trust but verify when it came to the Russians, and it's understandable that we can't trust BP given what we've been through. But I do think it's important to verify that, you know, this thing is capped, that the allegations that the earlier guest made that there's a giant hole someplace else in the Gulf. I think we should find out whether that is indeed the case, whether that is true.
Exactly. Let us move on to Karl Rove, just because it's too fun not to. Where is it here? Karl Rove out saying that the Democrats were lying about Bush, lying about the war. The quote says, what Democrats started 7 years ago left us less united as a nation to confront foreign challenges and overcome America's enemies. Where's another one? In a new op-ed here, it's, we know President Bush did not intentionally mislead the nation, on and on. Anyway, Mark, what is the upside of Karl Rove calling the Democrats a bunch of liars as it pertains to the Iraq war and indicting George Bush and his administration for claiming that there was weapons of mass destruction?
There isn't an upside to this, and quite frankly, Dylan, the most astounding thing to me is that Karl Rove chose to bring this issue up now. You know, whatever you think about the wisdom of Bush lied and people died and that whole thing, why bring it up now unless, you know, you're trying to vindicate yourself?
How do you look at this, Jonathan?
And I was going to say, I think that's what's going on. I mean, we've heard from Karl Rove and other members of former President Bush's administration doing everything they can to sort of make things right, to burnish President Bush's image and to sort of gloss over some very big problems out of that administration, from the wars to you know, financial reform and things like that we've been talking about for the last couple of years. And, you know, President Bush is putting the finishing touches on his own book, and I'll be very curious to see how he addresses all of these issues, because to my mind, I'm wondering if what Rove is doing and what other alumni of the Bush administration are doing is sort of laying the groundwork for what President Bush ultimately says.
I seriously doubt that that's the case, and I'll tell you why I think that's the case, Jonathan, because this whole Bush lied, people died meme that we haven't heard for a long time, thankfully, ranks right up there with the far-right cranks that say that Franklin Roosevelt let the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor so that we could have an excuse to get into war. It's a ridiculous assertion, and it's even more ridiculous to re-inject it now as a factor in the congressional campaign.
Yeah.
This makes no sense.
I agree with you, Mark. I don't get it. I don't get it at all.
It doesn't make sense.
All right. Will you guys stick with me a little bit? I have got more. I've got some BP for you. Right now, we are awaiting, however, remarks from the president on this afternoon's passage of financial reform, or so-called reform. It depends on how you feel about too big to fail, leverage, stealing money, conflict of interest, and these sorts of things. But if you're fine with all of that, then yes, this is reform. He may also comment on the news about the BP oil leak. Do stay with us. All right, back mixing it up in the day's other headlines. Reaction from the UK and our BP Lockerbie reporting, and new numbers about pill popping in America. We start, though, with new scrutiny on BP's role in the release of the Lockerbie bomber. The oil giant admitting that it asked the British government to speed up the release of Libyan prisoners, but denies it intervened specifically in the case of convicted terrorist al-Megrahi. The company says it backed the agreement to protect an oil deal in Libya that could be worth up to $20 billion. That's good money. The BP says it was, quote, not involved in any discussions with the UK government or the Scottish government about the release of Mr. al-Megrahi. However, British officials have said BP was a factor in that decision. In fact, just last year, former Justice Minister Jack Straw said at the time of the release, BP was a very big part of the release, saying he was unapologetic about considering trade and BP in the decision to free the terrorist. Now, the British media are weighing in, including myself here in the discussion.
This is the kind of story that turns anger toward what Americans still call British petroleum into hostility toward the whole country.
Yeah, we should take some action against England.
Yes.
Not just...
I agree. With friends like that, who needs enemies?
You got it.
Joining us now, Washington correspondent for Britain's Channel 4 News, Sarah Smith, along with our Mix It Up panel, editorial writer for the Washington Post, and Jonathan Capehart, along with editorial page editor for the Washington Examiner, Mark Tapscott. Sarah, obviously, I'll begin with you. What are the perceptions on the ground, if you will, in the UK relative to some of the characterizations offered by myself and others relative to BP and this deal?
A lot of people in Britain have been extremely cynical about this deal from the very beginning. So some of this isn't news to the UK. For the last year or so, people have believed that there probably was a connection between the release of al-Megrahi and BP's huge oil deals in Libya. People are very interested, of course, to see whether or not this renewed attention in the United States will produce any new evidence to try